Let's break down these numbers a bit more. And to do that, I want to bring in our next guest, Milton Ezrati, chief economist at Vested. Milton, it's good to see you this morning. So these weekly jobless numbers, worse than expected, moving in the wrong direction. 885,000 people filing for these first-time unemployment benefits last week. Despite that, the stock market set to open at a record high. What's your reaction to the jobless numbers?
The jobless numbers are tied to the renewed lockdowns we're seeing, and we're not going to see any improvement until the authorities can allow the reopening to continue. The good numbers we got in the summer were because there was a partial reopening. It was a great relief from the lockdowns and the quarantines of spring. Now we're going in the wrong direction, or it may be necessary, but we're going in the direction of more lockdowns. A lot of firms that were hanging on by their fingernails have declared bankruptcy, and that has contributed to this, and that's not going to change until we get a vaccine or for some other reason the infections fall, and I don't see any reason for that. I'm not an epidemiologist,
Milton,
until we get the vaccine.
And I think that is obviously the consensus among the vast majority of economists. Which sectors are going to be the worst impacted, including jobs, Americans? In which sectors are they at risk potentially of losing their job?
Well, the biggest sector has always been the one that had the greatest hiring in the summer and is now reversing is the leisure, hospitality, restaurants, bars. This has suffered the most. And the retail, we got some disappointing numbers in November. I expected it to slow, but they were worse than I expected. And so we're going to see that in face-to-face retail. There may be some pickup in deliveries, but it's not going to be enough to cover the ground until we can fully reopen the economy and people lose their fear of dealing with other people.
So how does this stack up, what we're looking at right now, of course, knowing that we still have several holidays and potential celebrations, despite the recommendation that people just stay within their immediate family? How does this current situation stack up to what you were expecting, perhaps in the summer, of what this winter would bring?
Well, it is worse than I expected. As I say, I can't forecast the infections. I'm in no position to do that. But we were progressing very strongly in the summer. The economy had what could only be described as a powerful momentum going into this period. But the new renewed lockdowns and the fear that has inspired those lockdowns, because that's an important factor too, has just put the brakes on this, and we're paying the consequences in jobs, or some people are paying the consequences in jobs.
So what's your advice to Americans? It's the holidays, right? We want to be thinking about positive things. Yes, a vaccine is on the horizon, but from an economic standpoint, how should they be preparing?
Well, the only thing they can do is be careful. And unfortunately, that care, which is necessary from a medical point of view, is really doing a lot of harm to the economy. So, but they have to be careful for themselves. We want them to be around in the spring to get the vaccine.
And now, in terms of what will happen from here, I mentioned that there are still holidays. People will potentially celebrate those in gatherings despite recommendations to not do that and just to stick with your immediate family. Do you anticipate that these numbers will climb in terms of the jobless numbers that we see in the months ahead?
Well, I don't know if the jobless numbers are already at highs. Keep in mind, there are being people rehired elsewhere, so that one of the reasons we saw these climbs in jobless numbers, and yet we saw total hiring, total job numbers growing, is because the jobless numbers only count the people who are laid off. If you get laid off, you get counting the jobless numbers. If you find a job the next month, you don't count the jobless numbers. So it's not like they're a net figure. But we're going to see this, especially with the closures now. There are a lot of people who held on skeleton crews at restaurants and retail establishments. Now that they've declared bankruptcy, they've given up. Those people are going to be laid off. It's going to climb. As far as the holidays are concerned, I described the Thanksgiving holiday with people on the road as one of the greatest examples of civil disobedience in the country's history. People did go out and meet each other. And unfortunately for the infection rate, they're probably going to do that again for these holidays coming into what used to be called the Christmas season.
Now, I just wonder, moving ahead here, I know we are at highs when it comes to the jobless rate, but do you anticipate that it could climb because some of these sectors are at risk of seeing more layoffs?
Well, I think it could climb, but I think it will be marginal. We had most of the country is still as opened as they were late in summer. Some of the most affected regions, like New York City, we had the shutdown of indoor dining. California has had a rise in infections there, closing down. Most of the rest of the country, with some exceptions, is improving. So they're going to maintain the relative reopening. That means that the gains will be much less than in the summer, but we will still probably have modest gains going into December, January, and then hope with the vaccine that this rapid recovery picks up into the spring. That's
Milton,
what the market's betting on.
just very quickly, Milton, before we have to let you go, there have been questions as to how many Americans truly are still unemployed. Continuing claims in this report this morning showing 5.5 million Americans still collecting those state unemployment benefits. As of late November, we saw about 4.5 million collecting the federal unemployment benefits. But then there is a large swath, unfortunately, of Americans who are just discouraged from entering the workforce. By your calculations, how many Americans are still out of work because of this pandemic?
Well, it's higher than that 5.5 million. I would reckon the number is closer to 7 million, but that's only an extension of the Labor Department figures that I'm getting. I'm not doing a survey on my own.
All right, Milton Ezrati, Chief Economist at Vested. Milton, thanks so much for sitting down with us this morning.